When a quiet single dad and a powerful billionaire CEO crash land on a deserted island, tempers flare, secrets spill, and one impossible question threatens to change both their lives forever. Ethan Cole never believed life would put him in the same room, let alone the same helicopter, with someone like Ariana Vale, the billionaire CEO whose face appeared on magazine covers, investment panels, and harsh corporate exposes. He was a single dad, a ground technician who worked double shifts at the airport hangar and triple shifts when Lily needed medicine, school supplies, or a rare treat like vanilla ice cream on a hot day. The morning of the crash started like every other: dark coffee, a quick hug for Lily before dropping her at Mrs. Harper's apartment, and then a long walk toward the hangar with tired eyes and a clear plan to finish early. But Ariana's visit changed everything. She was scheduled to inspect the company's fleet upgrades, and her team was already nervous. Her reputation wasn't unearned. She was brilliant, strategic, and terrifying when she wanted results, and everyone in her presence adjusted their posture at least twice. Ethan didn't care much about her title, but even he felt the sharpness of her gaze when she walked past. Her voice carried authority that was both impressive and exhausting. He tried to stay out of the way, but as fate would have it, the last-minute mechanical check required one more technician, and he was standing closest. "You come with us," her assistant called out. Ethan blinked, confused. "Ma'am, my shift. The CEO needs a tech on board to confirm the landing gear adjustments," the assistant insisted. Ariana's eyes flicked over him with impatience. "Is this going to be a problem?" Ethan swallowed the frustration rising in his chest. "No, ma'am." And that one decision, stupid, forced, and rushed, became the pivot point that changed both of their lives. The helicopter lifted gently at first, blades slicing the calm morning air as the city shrank under them. For the first few minutes, Ariana stayed glued to her tablet, scrolling through reports with tight brows while Ethan secured himself to the side seat. He planned to run the diagnostics once they landed. Simple, easy, 15 minutes. But weather has a way of laughing at human schedules. The sky darkened without warning, sunlight smothered by thick gray clouds rolling fast from the horizon. Ethan frowned, leaning toward the cockpit. The pilot's knuckles were already white on the control stick. "Ma'am," he spoke loudly over the rising wind, "we might need to turn." A violent jolt cut him off. Ariana's tablet flew from her hands. The helicopter lurched sideways, alarms blaring in shrill, merciless beeps. "What's happening?" she yelled. Ethan braced himself against the metal frame as the aircraft dipped. "Downdraft, we're losing altitude," the pilot shouted. Turbulence slammed them again, and Ariana, for all her power and poise, looked suddenly small, terrified, breath shaking, fingers gripping the armrest, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Ethan's heart pounded. He had been scared before during Lily's fevers, during nights when he didn't know if he could pay rent, but nothing compared to the helplessness of being trapped inside a machine that was failing mid-air. Rain struck the windshield in sheets, the rotor blades whining louder as speed dropped. Ocean appeared below them, churning violently. "Brace!" the pilot screamed. Ethan reached forward without thinking and grabbed Ariana's arm, pulling her into a safer position. The helicopter skidded across the water in a harsh, scraping motion, metal screaming as waves swallowed the landing skids. Cold ocean surged in almost instantly. The pilot fought to keep the craft afloat, but it tilted sharply, taking on water. Ethan unbuckled, grabbed Ariana's wrist, and pulled. "Move, now!" She stumbled but followed, adrenaline drowning her usual command. The emergency exit jammed once, twice then gave way with a gush of seawater. They plunged into the cold ocean, gasping as the helicopter groaned behind them and slowly sank into the deep. Ethan didn't have time to think. He hooked one arm around Ariana's waist and kicked hard against the current, fighting waves that slapped salty water into his mouth and nose. Ariana struggled at first, panic hitting her in sharp, shallow breaths, until Ethan's calm voice cut through. "Look at me. Keep breathing. I've got you." She clung to him, not in authority but raw human fear. They swam toward the distant outline of land, a curved stretch of sand bordered by dense green jungle. It felt impossibly far, but Ethan pushed through, each stroke fueled by images of Lily waiting for him. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour, but finally their feet hit sand. They collapsed onto the shore, coughing, shivering, exhausted. For a long moment, neither spoke, both too shocked to process the reality that their helicopter was gone, the pilot missing, and the world had no idea where they were. The island around them buzzed with unfamiliar insects. Palm trees swayed under the fading storm clouds. Waves crashed gently now, almost mockingly, as if the ocean had already forgotten it tried to drown them. Ariana pushed herself up on trembling arms, her hair plastered to her face, her breaths uneven. This can't be happening, she whispered. Ethan scanned the horizon. No boats, no planes, no signs of life. Just wilderness. Just isolation. Just them. He forced his voice to remain steady. We survived the crash. That's step one. Ariana turned her head sharply, eyes flashing with anger born from fear. Step one? Ethan, we're stranded. Do you even know where we are? Do you know if anyone can find us? He looked at the sky, then the coastline. Not yet. But we'll figure it out. His calmness only seemed to frustrate her more. I don't even have my phone. I don't have anything. My company, my team, they'll expect updates. They'll think I'm missing. Her voice cracked. Ethan softened, crouching beside her. Ariana. Right now, none of that matters. She looked at him, startled by the gentleness in his tone, as if no one had ever spoken to her, like she was just a person instead of a CEO. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, we need shelter before the sun goes down. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. For the first time in her life, Ariana Vale allowed someone else to lead. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole felt the quiet, heavy weight of responsibility for someone who wasn't his daughter, but whose survival suddenly depended on him just as much. Ariana Vale had negotiated billion-dollar deals, dismantled failing divisions, and walked into boardrooms packed with men determined to see her fall, but she had never felt as helpless as she did standing, barefoot on that stretch of unknown sand, while Ethan quietly gathered broken branches and dry leaves. The sun was dropping fast, staining the sky with streaks of orange that did nothing to calm her heartbeat. Her clothes still clung to her skin, heavy with salt water, and every step felt unsteady, unfamiliar. She kept her arms folded tightly, partly from the cold and partly to hide how much her hands were shaking. Watching Ethan work with quiet focus only made the contrast sharper. He moved like someone who had spent years solving problems others ignored. He examined palm trees for fallen fronds, tested driftwood for dryness, studied the wind direction, checked the tide line. While she wrestled with disbelief, he was already building the first step toward survival. The realization stung her pride more than she expected. Ariana was used to giving orders and seeing them followed. Now she didn't even know where to begin. Still, she walked toward him, trying to hold herself with the same executive posture she used in front of reporters. You don't have to do everything alone, she said, though even she could hear the strain in her voice. Ethan didn't stop arranging the fire pit. I know, he replied calmly. But it's faster this way. His tone wasn't dismissive, just practical. That made it worse. For a moment, she wanted to snap, to remind him she was the CEO of Vale Global, a woman who led 40,000 employees. But the island didn't care about her titles, her wealth, her reputation. Here she was just a scared, exhausted human. That thought hit her so hard she instinctively rubbed her temples. Ethan finally lit the fire, sparks rising like tiny fireflies toward the darkening sky. The flame grew steadily, casting warm light over their faces. Ariana sank onto a flat rock beside it, hugging her knees. I can't believe this, she murmured, staring into the fire. I had a full schedule today, meetings, investor calls, a report due, and now. Her voice trailed off as she glanced around the vast emptiness. Ethan sat beside her, not too close, not too far, and poked the fire with a stick to keep it alive. "You're not the only one who had plans," he said gently. "I was supposed to pick up Lily from Mrs. Harper's by 6. Ariana turned her head, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Your daughter, she must be scared." Ethan nodded slowly. "She's strong, but yeah. She be worried." Something softened in Ariana's chest. She had seen fathers in boardrooms brag about their kids for appearances, but Ethan's voice held genuine warmth and quiet devotion. It made her wonder how someone like him ended up doing maintenance work on aircraft instead of leading a team or running a company. After a long silence, she asked, "How old is she?" 7, he replied. "Smart, stubborn, and the reason I get up every morning." Ariana smiled faintly. "She sounds amazing." Ethan gave a soft chuckle. "She is." The fire crackled, filling the quiet between them. The wind chilled, brushing against their wet clothes. Ariana shivered without meaning to, and Ethan immediately stood, pulling a large palm frond over the shelter he'd started earlier. "We need more cover," he said. "It'll get colder tonight." Ariana followed him, trying to help, though every attempt felt clumsy. She tried lifting a fallen branch too heavy. She tried weaving palm leaves, her fingers kept slipping. She tried tying knots, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Frustration burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why can't I do anything right?" Ethan paused, studying her carefully. He didn't look annoyed or amused, just understanding. "Because you're exhausted, cold, and you almost died 2 hours ago," he said calmly. "Your body's in shock." Ariana blinked, embarrassed by her own outburst. "But you're fine." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not. I'm just used to pushing through it." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She expected a lecture, maybe a challenge, but not this quiet transparency. She inhaled shakily. "I don't know how to do any of this," Ethan softened. "You will. Just takes time." She lowered herself onto the sand, wrapping her arms around her legs again. For the first time in years, Ariana Vale felt small, not because she was weak, but because her environment no longer rewarded her strengths. Her intelligence, her decisiveness, her strategic thinking, all useless here. A tear she didn't authorize slipped down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, but Ethan noticed. He crouched beside her, voice gentle. "It's okay to be scared." She looked up sharply. "I'm not scared." But the tremble in her voice betrayed her. Ethan didn't call her out on it. Instead, he sat beside her again, the fire casting golden light on his tired face. "I know what it feels like," he said softly. "To not have control." Ariana exhaled shakily. "I've built my entire life around control," she whispered. "Every decision, every hour, every breath. And now I can't control anything. Not the weather, not the rescue, not—" She didn't finish. Ethan waited. Finally she met his eyes. "Not myself." Her confession hung in the air like a fragile thread. Ethan didn't reach for her, but something in his posture made her feel steadier. "Then let me share the load," he said. "At least until help arrives." His words carried a reassuring weight, a grounding calm she couldn't find on her own. Ariana took a long, shaky breath. All right. It was the first time she had agreed to someone else's lead without negotiation. They finished reinforcing the shelter as night fully settled in. Crickets chirped in the jungle, waves whispered against the shore, and the stars emerged one by one above them, clearer, brighter, untouched by city lights. Ariana lay down inside the shelter, still trembling slightly. Ethan sat at the entrance, watching the fire to keep it alive. She listened to the quiet crackling and the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing, and for the first time since the crash, her fear eased just enough to let weariness take over. As she drifted toward sleep, she whispered, barely audible, "Ethan." "Thank you." He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we figure out our next move." And as the fire glowed through the night, Ariana realized something she had never admitted in her entire life. She was no longer afraid of being stranded. She was afraid of how much she needed him. Morning arrived quietly, the waves brushing the shore in slow, steady breaths as if the island itself were waking up with them. Ariana opened her eyes to a soft glow slipping through gaps in the palm leaf shelter. For a moment she forgot where she was. She expected the ceiling of her penthouse suite, the hum of her air purifier, her assistant's morning briefing waiting on her tablet. But then her back reminded her she'd slept on sand. Her clothes were stiff with dried salt, and Ethan was sitting outside sharpening a stick into a spear with careful, practiced motions. The sight of him focused, steady, grounded pulled her fully into reality. She sat up slowly, rubbing the stiffness from her neck. "You've been awake long," she said, her voice hoarse. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "Didn't sleep much. Needed to check the tide, see what washed up." His tone held the same quiet calm that had kept her sane through the storm. Ariana stepped out of the shelter, hugging her arms against the morning chill. She noticed small piles of things Ethan had collected. A few unbroken coconuts, shells, driftwood, a long piece of seaweed. He was studying everything with a technician's eye. "Why the seaweed?" she asked. He held it up. "If it's fresh enough, we can use it to bind branches. Easier than vines." Ariana blinked. "You know all of this?" Ethan shrugged. "When you raise a kid alone, you learn to fix things. And when you can't afford to buy new, you learn to improvise." Something in his voice, the mixture of pride and exhaustion, made her chest tighten. She realized she didn't know any man like him. People in her world solved problems by outsourcing them, delegating them, throwing money at them. Ethan solved problems because he had no other choice. As they walked down the coastline searching for anything useful, the sun climbed higher, warming their skin. Ariana's footsteps grew steadier, though she still winced at the faint pain in her cut foot. Ethan noticed immediately. He stopped, crouching to inspect it. "It's starting to swell," he said. "We need to clean it again," Ariana sighed. "It's fine. I can walk." Ethan shook his head. "You don't need an infection out here. Sit." His tone wasn't commanding, it was protective. Reluctantly, she obeyed. He washed the cut with ocean water first, then tore a strip from the inner lining of his sleeve and wrapped it carefully. Ariana watched the concentration on his face, the way he moved with patience he didn't give himself. "You take care of people," she said softly. Ethan paused. "I try." She studied him for a moment. "Do you take care of yourself that way?" His hand stilled. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. They continued along the beach until they reached a long stretch of coral flats. The water was clear, revealing darting fish and a wide pool protected by rocks. "We might get food here," Ethan said, stepping onto the rocks. Ariana watched him wade into the shallow pool, spear poised. He moved silently, eyes fixed on the fish. For a man who claimed to have no wilderness training, he moved like someone who trusted his instincts. Then, fast as lightning, he drove the spear downward, lifting it with a small silver fish wriggling on the end. Ariana's mouth fell open. "How did you?" "I watched the shadows," he said. "You always see the fish before you see the fish." Ariana shook her head, half amused, half amazed. "You're full of surprises." Ethan gave a faint smile. "You wouldn't know my type of life, Ariana." "Most people don't." She stepped closer. "Then tell me." The invitation hung in the air, weighty and warm. Ethan hesitated, his guard rising the way hers did in conference rooms. But something about this island stripped away old protections. He exhaled slowly. "Lily's mom died when she was 3. Car accident. One of those things you never see coming. Since then, it's just been me and her. I take extra shifts, extra jobs, anything that helps. I don't have time for much else." Ariana's chest softened. The loneliness in his voice mirrored something she recognized deep inside herself. Except where she hid hers in power, he carried his in silence. She sat on a flat rock, letting the tide wash over her feet. "You know," she began, "people think I have everything. Money, power, influence, a company worth billions. but it never feels like mine. It feels like something I'm constantly trying not to lose. Ethan looked at her then, really looked. You don't trust people. Ariana laughed under her breath. Can you blame me? Everyone in my world wants something. A raise, a contract, a favor. And those who can't take anything from me usually fear me. Her voice cracked a little on the last word. No one just sees me. Ethan's eyes softened. I see you, she swallowed. Do you? Yeah, he said quietly. You're strong, but lonely. Tough, but tired. And you're trying hard not to fall apart here. But you don't have to pretend with me. Her breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like that, stripped of titles, stripped of armor. They walked farther until they reached a small cliffside with grass and wildflowers. From here the entire island stretched before them. The wind brushed through Ariana's hair, carrying the scent of salt and sun. It's beautiful, she murmured. Ethan stood beside her. Yeah, but beauty doesn't mean safety, she nodded. Still, it's calmer than my life back home. You don't like your life? Ethan asked. Ariana hesitated. I like the control, the success. But I don't think I like the person I've become in the process. The confession felt like a release, like something she'd held inside for years. Ethan didn't lecture her or pity her. He simply stood there, his presence steady as the rocks beneath their feet. The wind grew stronger, pushing against them, and Ariana shivered despite the warm sunlight. Ethan stepped slightly closer, instinctively shielding her from the gust. She glanced up, and for a moment, something passed between them, something she wasn't ready to name. As they headed back toward their camp, the sun dipping low again, Ariana felt the island shifting something inside her. Not just fear, not just survival, but connection, real connection. She kept stealing glances at Ethan, noticing things she hadn't before. The tired warmth of his eyes, the strength in his hands, the way he always positioned himself between her and any danger without announcing it. When they reached their shelter, Ethan set the fish on a flat stone and began preparing it. Ariana sat beside the fire, knees pulled close, watching him silently. The flames reflected in his eyes, and she felt something unfamiliar but undeniable. Trust. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't have to. The island stripped away many things, but it gave her one truth she couldn't ignore. She wasn't alone anymore. Not here, not with him. The storm returned without warning, as if the island had been waiting for the perfect moment to test them again. The air turned heavy first, thick and still, the kind of silence that makes every muscle tighten before the sky even darkens. Ariana felt it before she saw it, an uneasy prickle along her arms as the first low rumble rolled across the horizon. Ethan glanced up from the small fire he was tending, reading the clouds instantly. We need to move, he said, his voice sharper than usual. Ariana followed his gaze. The sky had shifted from clear blue to a bruised shade of gray, layered with fast-moving clouds that seemed to devour the sun. The wind picked up, rattling palm fronds and tossing her already tangled hair across her face. She swallowed. Another storm? Ethan was already grabbing supplies, half of their coconuts, the sharpened spear, the strips of cloth he'd made for bandages. Worse, he said. Much worse. Fear surged through her, sudden and visceral, but she pushed it down and helped him gather what she could. The wind grew violent in minutes, tearing at their shelter. Leaves ripped away, branches creaked ominously, and sand whipped around their ankles like stinging needles. The world felt on the edge of splitting open. Ethan grabbed Ariana's hand. We can't stay here, he shouted over the rising wind. He pulled her toward the rocky cliffside they'd explored earlier, the one with the natural overhang. Rain exploded from the sky in sheets, instantly soaking them as thunder cracked overhead, so loud Ariana flinched as if struck. Ethan held her steady, shielding her with his body whenever the wind shoved them sideways. By the time they reached the cliff, the storm had become a living beast. Waves crashed violently against the shore, swallowing half the beach in white foam. Branches snapped and flew like dangerous shards. Ariana stumbled as they climbed the rocks, her injured foot screaming with every step. She lost her footing once, slipping on slick stone, but Ethan caught her before she fell, gripping her waist with both hands. "I've got you," he said, breathless. Even through the chaos, his voice wrapped around her like an anchor. They ducked beneath the overhang, just as lightning struck a palm tree in a burst of violent white light. Ariana gasped and pressed herself closer to the rock wall, heart thundering in her chest. Ethan remained beside her, chest heaving, his shirt plastered to him from rain, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. Outside, the storm raged with a cruelty she had never seen: roaring winds, collapsing trees, waves that seemed to claw at the land. She had weathered hostile boardrooms, brutal takeovers, and public scandals, but none of that had prepared her for nature unleashed like this. She hugged her knees to her chest, shivering as cold water dripped from the stone above. Ethan moved closer, shielding her from the worst of the spray. "It'll pass," he murmured. "Storms always do." Ariana let out a tight breath, barely audible. "You're not scared?" Ethan looked out at the violent ocean before answering. Terrified, she turned to him, surprised. "You don't look it." He smiled faintly. "I don't have the luxury of panicking. Not when someone's depending on me." His words hit her deeper than she expected. She studied him, the way his gaze stayed sharp despite exhaustion, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the quiet strength he seemed to draw from places she couldn't see. She envied that strength. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what if no one finds us?" He stayed silent for a long moment, watching a wave slam against the rocks below. "Then we survive," he said. "One day at a time." But Ariana shook her head, emotion breaking through. "That's not what I meant." Ethan finally met her eyes, and what she saw there, the empathy, the warmth, the vulnerability, made her breath catch. She pressed a hand against her chest as if trying to steady her own heartbeat. "I'm not afraid of this island," she confessed. "I'm afraid of dying here without ever being truly known by anyone." Ethan's face softened. He reached out slowly, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, wiping away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "I see you," he whispered. "Not the CEO, not the headlines. Just you." Ariana closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the warmth of his palm. For the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like she had to hold herself together. Thunder cracked again, shaking the ground beneath them. Ariana pressed closer to him, instinctively seeking his warmth, his steadiness. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her into his side, protecting her from the cold spray of the storm. She could feel his heartbeat through his soaked shirt, strong, steady, grounding. The overhang did little to block the wind, but Ethan's presence made the chaos feel less suffocating. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the storm. "I don't want to die." He tightened his arm around her. "You're not going to." But she shook her head, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. "I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of never having something real." Ethan inhaled sharply, the weight of her confession hitting him with unexpected force. He tilted her chin gently so she had to look at him. "You're not alone," he said quietly, his voice steady even as the wind screamed around them. "Not anymore." The storm roared for hours, lightning tearing the sky open, rain hammering the earth, waves rising to swallow the beach. Their entire camp was destroyed before their eyes, ripped apart by the wind, their shelter collapsing into scattered pieces. Ariana watched it break, a symbolic tearing of everything she had depended on to feel safe, and yet she didn't break with it. Because Ethan held her through every crash, every tremor, every moment she thought her heart would burst from fear. She clutched his shirt, her face buried against him, and he didn't let go. Not once. When the storm finally weakened into a weary drizzle, Ariana's body felt drained, as if the island had taken something from her, but left something new in its place. She shifted slightly, lifting her head from Ethan's shoulder. His eyes were tired, lined with worry and lack of sleep, but still warm. Still steady. "Ethan," she whispered, unsure what she wanted to say. He brushed wet strands of hair from her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek. There was no fear in his touch, only softness. Only truth. Ariana's breath shivered, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for not letting me fall apart." Ethan shook his head. "You're stronger than you think." She pressed her forehead to his, letting their breath mingle in the quiet aftermath of chaos. The island had stripped them bare physically, emotionally, painfully, leaving only the rawest parts of themselves exposed. And in that rawness, they found something neither had expected: safety, connection, and a fragile, growing trust neither dared to name yet. The island had changed them slowly at first, then all at once. After the storm destroyed their camp, Ethan and Ariana spent the next 2 days rebuilding. But something between them had already shifted in a way neither could ignore. The silence they once shared out of tension had softened into a silence born of understanding, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. Ariana woke that morning to the glow of soft sunrise and the gentle crackle of a new fire Ethan had already started. Her body ached, her clothes were still damp in patches, and her hair was an untamable mess, but none of that embarrassed her anymore. She stepped out of their shelter, now sturdier, higher, reinforced with driftwood and stones, and found Ethan crouched over the fire, turning a fish on a stick. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Morning," he said with a tired but warm smile. She sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees as the fire warmed her skin. "Did you sleep?" she asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. Enough. She knew that meant no, but she didn't push. The exhaustion in his face didn't dim the steadiness in his eyes. If anything, it made her chest tighten with an ache she didn't want to name. They ate together in quiet calm, the ocean humming behind them, the island breathing its slow rhythm around them. Ariana watched Ethan with growing warmth, his careful hands, the sincerity he didn't try to hide, the protective instinct she felt even when he said nothing. She didn't understand how a man like him existed so far outside the world she knew. When breakfast was done, they walked along the coastline, checking for debris washed in by the storm. Ariana limped slightly but refused help until a sharp jolt of pain made her stop. Ethan noticed instantly. "You're pushing too hard," he said firmly. Ariana exhaled, frustration simmering beneath her ribs. "I don't want to be helpless." Ethan stepped closer, his voice gentle but unyielding. "Needing help isn't helpless." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words tangled in her throat. No one had ever said something like that to her without judgment. He knelt, carefully lifting her foot to examine the bandage. "It's healing," he murmured. "But slow." Ariana watched him work with painstaking care, and every touch made something inside her tremble, not out of pain, but out of a strange, blooming ache she couldn't suppress. When he finished, she stared at him for a long moment. "Ethan, why are you so good to me?" He looked up, surprised by the question. "Because we're in this together," he said simply. But the look in his eyes told her there was more, something unspoken, something he wasn't ready to admit aloud. They continued walking until they reached the far end of the beach, where the sand curved sharply into high black rocks. Ariana climbed slowly, with Ethan spotting her from behind. Once they reached the top, a breathtaking view unfolded. The entire island rolled out beneath them, waves crashing, green jungle swaying, sunlight glittering against tide pools. Ariana's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't looking at the scenery anymore. He was looking at her, sunlight warming her face, wind tugging gently at her hair, her eyes soft in a way he had never seen them before. She caught the shift in his gaze and felt her heartbeat stutter. "Ethan," she whispered, but she didn't know what she meant to follow it with. He stepped back slightly, breaking the moment before it could deepen. "We should gather more driftwood before it gets dark," she nodded, though a small part of her ached at the distance he put between them. They worked together through the afternoon, collecting branches, searching the shoreline, reinforcing their camp. Every touch of their hands, even accidental, sent a quiet spark through Ariana that she tried to ignore. Every time she stumbled, Ethan caught her with instinctive protective reflexes that made her heartbeat warm. And every time Ethan looked at her too long, he looked away as if unsure whether he was allowed to feel what he felt. As evening settled, they sat by the fire again, watching the sky turn gold, then orange, then deep violet. The flames cast warm shadows on their faces, and the air was cool enough that Ariana scooted a little closer to Ethan without thinking. He glanced at her, and this time he didn't move away. She drew a slow breath, letting the firelight paint her words with courage. "Ethan, these days with you, they scare me." He looked at her, concern shadowing his features. "Why?" Her gaze lowered to the sand, her voice trembling with honesty. "Because I've never felt safe with anyone before." "Not like this," Ethan exhaled, the weight of her confession settling over him. He had tried so hard to keep his emotions locked behind the walls he built for Lily's sake, for survival's sake, for the sake of never letting anything distract him. But Ariana's vulnerability cracked through every one of those walls. He shifted slightly, turning to face her. "Ariana, I don't want to be something you cling to just because the island is lonely." Her eyes lifted sharply, filled with emotion. "This isn't loneliness," she whispered. "It's clarity." Her honesty disarmed him. The firelight danced across her face, illuminating the truth she could no longer hide. Ethan swallowed hard. "Ariana, I have Lily. She's my world. I can't promise anything that might take me away from her." Ariana nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the courage it took to finally express what her heart already knew. She leaned closer, her voice barely more than breath. "I'm not asking you to leave your world, Ethan. I'm asking if maybe I can fit into it." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had never imagined someone like her, powerful, brilliant, impossibly out of his reach, could want anything from him beyond survival. But here she was, raw and real, asking for something more. He reached out slowly, brushing his thumb across her cheek. She closed her eyes at the touch, leaning into his hand. "Ariana," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I won't leave you alone. Not here, not ever." She opened her eyes, tears shimmering. "And tell me something." "What?" he asked softly. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "If no one comes, will you stay with me?" The question hit him like a wave, gentle yet overwhelming. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he cupped her face fully, his forehead meeting hers, their breaths mingling. "I can't stay away from Lily," he said truthfully. "But I don't want a world where you're not in it." Ariana's breath shivered, a small vulnerable smile touching her lips. "Then maybe this island didn't trap us," she whispered. "Maybe it brought us here." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her presence settle into him like truth. The fire crackled softly beside them, the island quiet except for the gentle hush of waves. In that moment, neither was thinking of rescue or fear or tomorrow. Only each other and the fragile, undeniable connection that had become impossible to ignore. The morning of their rescue began like any other quiet waves. A soft breeze, sunlight breaking gently across the water, except something felt different. A subtle shift in the air that neither Ethan nor Ariana could explain. Ariana woke first, stretching beneath the shelter's shade, her body warm from the night she'd drifted to sleep, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. For a moment she simply watched him, peaceful in a way she had never seen him look before, his face softened by the early light. She still couldn't believe how close she had come to losing herself, to fear, to loneliness, to hopelessness, and how this man, this impossibly steady single father, had held her together every step of the way. She brushed a stray curl from her face and stepped out into the sand, inhaling the scent of salt and morning. She almost called his name before freezing. Their fire was still smoking. But the smoke was rising strangely, twisting upward in a narrow, straight pillar into the sky. Ethan stirred as she knelt beside him. "Ethan, something's happening." He rubbed his eyes, sat up, and followed her gaze, For a moment he didn't comprehend it. Then his entire body went still. A small plane circled far above them, its shadow slicing across the ocean like a miracle written in motion. Ariana's breath hitched. "They found us." Ethan didn't answer. He stood, sprinted across the beach, and grabbed handfuls of dried palm leaves, tossing them onto the fire to thicken the smoke. Ariana rushed to help, her hands trembling as flames surged higher. The plane dipped lower, circling again. It was impossible to deny now it wasn't random. They had been seen. Ariana pressed her hands to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Ethan threw an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as the signal from the plane 2 wing dips confirmed what her heart barely dared to believe. "They found us," Ethan whispered, voice cracking with relief. For a moment everything inside her collapsed, not from fear, but from the kind of overwhelming gratitude that made her knees weak. Hours later, the rescue boat sliced through the water toward the shore, men shouting orders as they jumped into the shallows, rushing toward Ethan and Ariana with blankets, medkits, questions. Ariana's heart hammered as hands steadied her, as someone wrapped a warm cloth around her shoulders. Ethan stood beside her, his arms still around her protectively, as if afraid she might disappear the second he let go. The rescue team confirmed their identities, radioed in the news, and prepared to take them aboard. But the moment Ariana stepped onto the boat, she froze not from fear, but from the sudden realization that everything was about to change. She looked back at the island, the place that had stripped her of power, fear, and armor, and given her something fragile and irreplaceable in return. On the ride back, Ariana stayed close to Ethan, their shoulders brushing, neither speaking but both understanding that the quiet between them had changed from survival to something deeper. When the mainland finally appeared on the horizon, a whirlwind of chaos awaited reporters crowding the docks, medical staff preparing stretchers, her board members demanding answers, and flashing cameras capturing every breath she took. Ethan stiffened at the noise, at the sudden invasion of a world he had no desire to stand in. Ariana saw it instantly. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. The simple touch made him look at her with startled tenderness. She squeezed gently. "I'm here. Don't disappear on me." She didn't say the words, but they lived in the connection between their hands. As they stepped onto the dock, the crowd erupted, questions shouted, microphones shoved forward, faces eager for scandal and spectacle. Ariana lifted her chin, sliding into her CEO composure, but this time her hand stayed tight in Ethan's. Gasps scattered through the reporters like sparks. Camera flashes froze the moment into 1,000 bright, blinding memories. Medical staff insisted they be checked at the emergency tent. Ariana agreed only on one condition, that Ethan stayed beside her. He did. They sat across from each other, wrapped in blankets, holding warm cups of broth. Outside, executives whispered assumptions and rumors. Ariana ignored them all. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. "Lily," he murmured suddenly, sitting up straighter. "I need to call Lily." Ariana's breath softened. "Go. I'll be right here." She watched him step outside, listened to the muffled sound of his voice as he spoke with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When he returned, his eyes were red. "She cried," he whispered. "She thought something happened to me." Ariana reached up, cupping his cheek with her hand. "You're going home to her. And she's getting her father back." Ethan leaned into her touch for just a moment, one brief, quiet second of vulnerability, before straightening. "What about you?" he asked softly. "What happens now?" Ariana's breath caught. She had spent her whole career making decisions instantly. But this wasn't a business choice. This was her heart. Her board approached soon after, sharp suits, sharper voices talking about press conferences, statements, reconstruction of the narrative. Ariana listened to none of it. She stepped toward Ethan, ignoring the stunned expressions around them. Her voice was low, meant only for him. "I'm not letting the island be the only place where we were honest." Ethan blinked. "Ariana, come see me tomorrow," she whispered, her eyes steady and certain. "Bring Lily. I want to meet her properly. And I want you to hear something without storms or fear in the way. Ethan searched her face, trying to understand. What do you want to tell me? Ariana gave a soft, trembling smile. That I don't want to go back to the world I had before. Not if you're not in it. The rescue team took them in separate vehicles protocol, not choice, but Ariana pressed her hand to the window, watching Ethan until he disappeared in the direction of his daughter. Only then did she let herself breathe. The next morning, Ariana stood on the rooftop of her corporate headquarters, the city sprawling beneath her, sunlight warming her skin. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan stepped out holding Lily's hand. Ariana froze not from shock, but from a sudden rush of warmth. Lily ran to her father first, hugging him tight. Then she turned to Ariana with big curious eyes. Ariana crouched, smiling gently. Hi Lily, I'm Ariana. Lily studied her for a quiet moment, then took her hand. Ethan's breath caught at the sight. Ariana's smile softened as she stood, turning to Ethan. This is what I wanted to tell you. She inhaled, gathering every piece of courage the island had taught her. I want you in my life. I want both of you in my life. Not because I'm lonely, not because of the island, but because you're the first person who has ever seen me without wanting anything in return. And I don't want to lose that. Ethan stared at her, stunned, moved, overwhelmed, before stepping forward and pulling her gently into his arms. Ariana closed her eyes as he whispered against her hair. Then we start, together. And for the first time in her life, Ariana Vale felt something she had never truly felt before home. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, make sure you subscribe to Drew Daily Stories for more powerful short dramas that will keep you hooked, moved, and ready for the next twist. Hit like, drop a comment, and let me know which moment surprised you the most.